on the data submission that we received several weeks back before the new year, and then prepare for the next submission. This is a pretty small group, so I'm envisioning that this can be an informal phone call or webinar. We'll take the opportunity to talk through some of the things we saw in the data. Just first off, overall, we thought the SWACC colleges really did an excellent job, and we appreciate the hard work on the data submission. In fact, I think we probably would grade the consortium as an A. Relative to some of the other TAACCCT grants that we're evaluating, the SWACC data was a lot easier to work with. So that's, it's great. It makes our lives easier. It speaks to the hard work that you did to prepare the data. And Beth, thank you for all of the groundwork that you did in preparation for the fall data submission. Let's see. So, Brian, I'm going to the slide number 3, fall 2014 data submission. Just so everybody knows that this is Chris Spence. I am the project leader from New Growth Group, the third-party evaluator for the SWACC TAACCCT grant. Also on the line with me are Brian Schmatzer, who is our statistician, Anna Meyer, who many of you may know. She has been involved in helping to wrangle data and is providing project support. And we have a new data analyst. Her name is Nikki Glazer-Stoikoi, who will very likely pop up on your radar screens as we move forward with the evaluation. She's an analyst and will be supporting Brian in his efforts to collect and analyze the data. We had an opportunity to take a look at the data submission that came in from each of the colleges and developed what we're internally calling feedback forms. We realized that we thought we needed to do a little bit of a better job on our end communicating to each of you how it is we're auditing and checking the data to see if it meets our needs. Again, on the whole, I thought the data was very good, but we wanted to take the opportunity to make a few points, all with the idea that the next data submission is coming up in a few weeks, February 20th. And so we wanted to, get on the phone, have this webinar with you with enough lead time leading up to that, in the hopes that, as we move forward with this evaluation, we have a few more years of it, that we can start to run on autopilot a little bit and just start, each data submission cycle just kind of run the same playbook and try to make it as easy as possible. Just a reminder what our evaluation strategy is before I get into the feedback forms. We're doing a quasi-experimental evaluation, meaning we have a program group of grant-affected participants and then a comparison group. Our two groups are designed and determined by a system of key courses. We have grant-affected programs, of course, programs that are receiving funding through the grant, but because of the messiness or the way that students declare for programs, the way we're identifying students is through key courses. In other words, if they show up in a key course, then that means they're a program participant. And then the same with comparison groups. The net that we're casting to drag in program participants and comparison groups is built on this system of key courses. If anybody has any confusion or questions or not sure what those key courses are, we're not covering that in detail today. So if there are questions about the design of the evaluation, the key courses, I would invite you to reach out to us. You can reach out to me or Brian or Nikki, and we'll be able to talk you through whatever questions you might have. Okay, so I want to talk about the feedback forms. This is slide 4. What we did was, for each of the colleges, we looked at the data submission. You may recall that there were 3 templates that we asked you to fill in. An intake form template, what we were calling a one-time data template, which essentially collects demographic information on students or information that doesn't change, like gender. That's what we call it one time. We only need it once. And then ongoing, an ongoing template, which collects data on students pertaining to the last academic term, you know, things like number of credits earned, number GPA, et cetera, things that are variable, so, which is why we call it ongoing. What we did was we did an audit of the data, generally interested in whether or not the data matches the templates. Is the data file internally consistent and complete, meaning across the various templates, are we seeing consistency in, for example, who's defined as a participant, or is the same information reflected in the templates pertaining to the individuals that were included. And generally speaking, does the data make sense? We, in looking at the data, realized that we wanted to be a little clearer on a couple of points. And so what we did was we made a list of 7 characteristics that the data should have. And then we went back and looked at the data and provided the feedback forms that hopefully you have seen. The intent is to, you know, following the first data submission for SWACC, to try to close any gaps or fix any hiccups that we saw in the data, and then ultimately to guide future data submissions. We still have a lot of data submissions to go for this evaluation, a few years of them, and so our hope is that the 7 characteristics that we've articulated in the feedback forms can help to improve the process. Okay, next slide, Brian.
Chris, just a point of clarification. I think everyone is aware of it, but just to remind everyone that you spoke about 3 templates, but in this case, in this consortium, we have the intake form data going directly into the Arkansas Research Center online web form, and that's being done by the project coordinators, who aren't, unless some people snuck through, are not the focus of this call, and we're talking to the IR folk who are more heavily concentrated on the one-time and ongoing templates, as well as a process of coming to agreement with the project coordinators about who's in the intake forms versus who's in the one-time form. I think everyone's aware of that system, but just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of the 7 data characteristics and then talk about some of the issues that we saw coming up in the data. At the end of the 7 data characteristics, there is, I forget what we were calling it, an action items slide where we talk through what to do about any discrepancies that we found in the data. Okay, so characteristic number 1 is that the one-time data is the template that we start with. It captures grant participants and comparison group individuals using the grant definition, which in this case is based on enrollment in a core course. We're specifically looking to see that there's 1 row in that spreadsheet per unique individual. The types of issues that we saw were that the comparison groups were overlapping with participants, or confusion, especially around the construction of the comparison group. So one of the elements in the slide in the spreadsheet asks for individuals to be indicated as participants or comparison group members. And in some cases, there were individuals that were marked as both or neither. And we're looking for some clean lines there. So if there's any overlap between who our participants and our comparisons are, then we want to try to clean that up. Another issue that in some cases is just a function of how early we are in this grant is that no comparison group data has been submitted yet. And so of course that's an issue that we need to rectify. Brian, would you add anything to this one?
No, not, yes, I would. Say no, but I really mean yes. Just that we're going to talk a little bit more about the comparison group later, after the 7 characteristics. This is a part of the process that a couple schools need to continue to work through because you know, we did our best as we were pulling together data submission in the fall, and it's just something we need to continue to work through. But there are definitely some colleges where there are core courses that appear in both the grant-affected program list and the comparison group list. So it's when you get students that appear in both lists, you shouldn't be surprised because the core course appeared in both lists, and that's not going to obviously lead to 2 separate groups. And so we're just going to need to work through that process with a couple of the colleges to make sure we have a comparison group that's separate from the participant group for evaluation purposes. And so it's not really a reflection of data that came in that's wonky so much as the construction from the very top level needs to be tweaked and refined so that when the data is pulled, it'll meet this characteristic. And we can talk about that again towards the end. That's all I would add.
Okay. The second data characteristic is that there's a unique participant intake form for each unique individual that's on the one-time template. We had no issues. SWAC colleges, I mean, you all did a great job, and this actually is a huge challenge for us in a lot of evaluations where the intake forms that get collected don't match the students that are being queried in the college's system. But this consortium did an excellent job of rectifying the intake forms with the query of the college's database. So we don't need to, Brian, unless you have other issues, I don't think we need to belabor this one.
No, just we of course hope that we'll do exactly as excellent of a job next submission as we did this submission, and all subsequent submissions will be as happy as clams. Because as you mentioned, I think we should not undersell how wonderful SWAC did in this respect. Because in other consortiums that we're evaluating, we're using the same template of 7 data characteristics, and this number 2 is a major stumbling block for other colleges. And the hard work that SWAC has done and Beth has done, we're just super happy about number 2.
Okay, so then number 3, there is a unique ongoing individual for each unique one-time individual. So this is keeping in mind that the one-time file is basically a list of students who have been indicated as either participants or comparison group members, along with data fields pertaining to them that don't change, like their gender, their race. Since these individuals have been identified as either a participant or comparison group member, we ought to also see them in the ongoing file, which is the file that we're using to track what has happened to those individuals over time. And if we're not seeing individuals, if we are seeing individuals in the one-time file and they're not showing up in the ongoing file, then that means there's incomplete data. And we are seeing some mismatch. Folks that are showing up in the one-time file, not showing up in the ongoing file, or vice versa. And so we've indicated in feedback forms if that's an issue for each of the colleges. And again, if there's an action item associated with that, but the intent is for everybody that shows up as a program participant or a comparison group member that we're getting information in each of the templates and that they line up. Brian, unless you have anything else, I'll move on to the next one.
Yeah, the thing I would add for this one is keep in mind, because of the way data in SWACC is being submitted, that the one-time we're requesting one-time and intake form data on people running one semester ahead of their ongoing data. So in this submission that we're talking about here, people submitted fall participants because the fall semester had started, but they, of course, could not give ongoing data in the fall because the fall semester hadn't finished yet. So in that respect, you're going to expect to see people show up. Anyone who showed up for the first time in the fall wouldn't have ongoing data associated with them. That's not the issue that we're talking about here. We're talking about people for whom there should be an ongoing record. There might be a couple colleges out there that have a couple individuals who should have ongoing data that we didn't see. But because of that difference between what semester we're getting one-time data for versus what semester we're getting ongoing data for, there will be a mismatch for those who are new in that latest semester. And so we tried in our feedback forms to adjust for that and not call anyone to the mat who had a mismatch for that obvious, very, very understandable reason. And if we mess that up, and that is the only reason for the mismatch, then that is something we can talk about school by school.
Okay. So number 4 is that we're looking for a separate row of data in the ongoing data for every semester in which an individual is tracked. So keeping in mind that the ongoing data is how we're tracking individuals over time. The way to enter that data into the ongoing file is just to create a separate row for each semester. And so we'll have, Joe Smith. Joe Smith has been enrolled 4 semesters. Then eventually we'll have 4 rows for Joe Smith, 1 for each semester that provides information on what happened to Joe in that semester. We would like to see that the individual is tracked starting with the semester in which they enrolled in one of the core courses. In other words, the core courses are what flags an individual for this evaluation. They enroll in a core course, and once they enroll in one of those core courses, then that's when they officially become a part of this evaluation. And so we'd like to see individuals tracked starting with the semester in which they first enrolled in the core course and then ending with the most recent academic semester. If an individual doesn't come back to school, then we would not expect to see any row pertaining to that individual. And so there's an assumption here that we need help from you all making sure that it's the correct assumption, and that's that if somebody has been enrolled in college for 3 consecutive semesters, and then the 4th semester we see no row pertaining to that individual, our assumption is that individual was not at the college. In other words, we ought to either see a completion for them in the previous semester, or they're not there. And so we'll need your help to make sure that that is a good assumption that we can continue to use as we move forward. And then if an individual earns multiple credentials in a semester, then you can use multiple rows to convey that information. So there is a scenario where you may have more than 1 row in a given semester for an individual. So issues, none. The evaluation is new, and so the tracking of individuals over time hasn't occurred yet. And so now is probably a good time for us to be having this conversation about how we would like people to be entered into these templates as we move forward, but at this point in time, no issues. You good, Brian?
Yep.
Okay, characteristic number 5, missing data. We understand that in some situations data is not available. It's not always apparent to us when data is not available. So we look for mostly complete data. If there's a significant amount of missing data, then we want to get back to you and figure out what the reason is. We need there to be a special focus on Social Security number, identifying information, current employment status, credits earned, completion, and credentials. The reason for this is these are really key variables in the evaluation. The Social Security number is especially important because that's what gets used to link one, across our files, and two, Arkansas Research Center uses the SSN to pull wage records, and so that's where we learn about employment. The others, the employment status, credits earned, completion, et cetera, those are really important in the evaluation, and the analyses are built around those things, and so we're really keying in on this list of things in terms of completion. SWACC did great. All the colleges did very well in this characteristic, so thank you. We'll continue to look for missing data, and in situations where we have questions about data that's missing, we'll reflect that. Brian, anything?
Just a small point that in addition to these, the ones under the bullet of special focus are not only important to the evaluation overall, but they're also the ones that the DOL is requesting in annual performance reports, and so they're kind of doubly important for that reason. It's hard to fill out a report saying how many people have earned credit if the credit column is blank. So it's for the purpose of the evaluation overall, but also for DOL reporting.
Okay. Number 6 has to do with abbreviations and codes. We come across this from time to time where a college pulls something out of its system and it's coded in a way that we don't recognize. We did not have any issues with SWACC colleges in this regard, so I won't belabor it. It does, if you do have a system that pulls something that doesn't match our format, that's okay. We don't need you to do data transformations, but we do need you to make sure we know what your format means, so we understand it. But things have looked pretty clear so far with the SWACC submissions, so thank you for that. Okay, and then the last one has to do with subsequent data submissions. We are looking for only new individuals in the one-time record. Brian, correct me if I misstate this, but we don't need to receive the one-time records over again for the students that have already been submitted. We only need students that are newly appearing on the one-time record. In other words, students that have newly become participants or comparison group members in the most recent semesters in the one-time file.
Correct.
For each unique individual, for each participant, we need to make sure that they have an intake form, and then the ongoing file gets a submission for new individuals. In other words, we see that alignment between the new individuals in the one-time record and the ongoing file. And there's a record for the most recent academic semester for anybody that previously was in the ongoing file. And our assumption is that, again, if an individual does not show up in the ongoing file, then that means they're not at the college. So it's going to be important for the enrollment outcome and many of the outcomes that assumption holds. Not relevant yet. We've only done one data submission. So we will be looking for these things, though, as new data submissions come in. Brian, you good?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that we're expecting. for subsequent submissions, because we're submitting every semester, there really won't be a need for multiple rows per individual in the ongoing file, unless there's multiple awards. But for multiple semesters, it shouldn't happen on an ongoing basis because we're submitting data every semester. And so if all goes well, it should be one row per person, which we will here internally append to the record we already have for that student from previous submissions. So as the ongoing file keeps coming in, it doesn't need to grow. From your point of view, it doesn't need to grow. We don't need, I can't remember who your example was, John Smith, Joe Smith? He might have been Joe. Joe doesn't need to have 4 rows this submission and 5 rows the next submission and 6 rows the next submission. Really only needs 1 row, because internally, when we fold it into the data we already have, his record will grow over time for us. So that's what we're envisioning here with C, 7C here.
Okay, great, thank you. So on the action item slide, the next data submission is due February 20th. We're expecting that the PIF, which is the participant intake form data, the one-time data, will consist of the PIF data and the one-time data through the spring 2015 semester. In other words, we're going to catch the new enrollments, plus ongoing data through the fall, the end of the previous semester. When your college submits the new data, please use the 7 data characteristics. And in the feedback forms, there were a set of action items that we indicated for each of the colleges. And basically, we indicated whether no action was needed, if something needed clarification. In other words, if there was something we didn't quite understand in the data, it might not require any resubmission of data, but maybe we can get on the phone with you or shoot us an email or something that answers the question. Or fix and resubmit. If you're in the fix and resubmit category for any of the elements, we hope that you can resubmit the data on the February 20th deadline. In other words, alongside the next data submission. The other thing is we are exceedingly available to talk through any issues or questions you might have about the feedback form or the data submission, generally speaking. We believe that it's very important at the front end to devote as much energy and time as we can to working with each of you. So as we move forward in this evaluation, it gets easier and easier. Hopefully we can start to run on autopilot as we move forward. Our plan is to do a feedback form following each data submission. And so the template that we made and that we sent, essentially it was the first page was the explanation of what it is and the 7 characteristics. The second page offered our reflection, and the third page listed the programs that we're tracking for your participants. If any of those, if there's any information that is confusing or seems like we're not quite getting it right, just give us a call or shoot us an email. We want to fix whatever issues or questions. We want to try to deal with them at the front end here so they don't get bigger as time goes on. Let's see. So the spring 2015 data submissions. This is slide 13. There's one change, which we are and it's a change to the one-time data. I'm sorry, correction. It's a change to the ongoing data. What we're realizing is that we're having trouble seeing which net students were caught in. For the purposes of building our program and comparison groups, we initially thought that there would be enough information in the forms from the intake form and then also from the other forms. But we're finding that that's not the case, and so we're adding a column to the ongoing data template where we essentially ask you to track what students, what programs students should be grouped in. In other words, they got caught because they were enrolled in a core course. Which program is that associated with? That'll tell us what group to put them in. It may ultimately be a column that the project managers fill in. I'm not sure how it gets filled in at the college, if that's something that IR can do easily or if it needs to be something that the project managers do. But we're adding a column, and the new template will be made available. Brian, remind me, what's our policy on data that's already been submitted in this new column? I believe we're not asking, if you've already submitted the data and we've not asked you to resubmit anything, then we're not going to ask you to go back and fill in this new column. Is that right, Brian?
That's right.
But for any new submissions, including resubmissions, we'd like the new column filled in. Let's see, I'll just go through this other topic. I'll just make it through the slides, and our final slide is questions, and so we can open up the floor for questions related to any of the things we've talked about or any other questions you might have, generally speaking. Other topics, we, as noted in characteristic number 1, there are some colleges that we need to clean up some of the comparison groups. Some colleges we need to work with to make sure you have a comparison cohort identified. Others we need to probably work with you to make sure that the program and comparison groups don't overlap. We need to, make sure that these things get deconflicted. We're anticipating that there could be some questions related to wage records. The Arkansas Research Center is really our source for wage records in Arkansas and also in surrounding states, where we of course know that everybody wants to make sure that the employment data is as complete as possible. And so we are working through the Arkansas Research Center and using data sharing agreements that they have with adjacent states to make sure that employment records from adjacent states get incorporated into our evaluation. The process should be transparent to you all. If you're submitting your data files that include Social Security numbers, then Arkansas Research Center can aggregate and collect the data from, or assemble the data from other states that we can use for the analysis. And I think that's the only point on that. Before we move to questions, Beth or Brian, do you have any points you'd like to make?
I do have a couple of things. For the missing data, employment status is mostly going to be from the participant intake forms. That's something that it's self-disclosed by the participants filling out the form. That's not something that's going to be in the IR database. If they do have access to it, you can use that. If not, that'll come from the participant intake form. And also, the project coordinators can go in and edit the participant intake forms. So if there are changes to contact information, that's where those changes should be made. And they'd have it first. Participant intake form would have it first before we do. Yeah. And then the other thing is the feedback forms were emailed from Anna on Friday, January 16th, if you guys haven't read those yet. So all of these points, the characteristics that Chris has gone through, are all in that email. So that's all I had.
Okay. So let's open up the floor questions about the content of this presentation or anything pertaining to the evaluation?
Hi, this is Stephanie from South Ark. We were one of the schools that looked like we didn't have any comparison cohorts, but what it was is we took a literal interpretation of the first column from the template, which says, are they a member of the comparison cohort or program participant, and the options were yes or no. So that was where our problem came in, because yes, everyone is a comparison cohort or a cohort individual. So that's not a problem. I marked on my internal sheets whether they were cohort or not, because I thought that was an odd way of putting it. But I didn't know if anybody else had come across the same problem, and wanted to make sure that I disclosed where my error came from.
Okay. Yes, that is an odd phrasing. We can clean that up.
I don't think anyone else from SWAC interpreted it that way, but if it makes you feel better, other colleges from other consortiums, you are not alone. There were a couple colleges that interpreted it the same way. So you're alone in this consortium, but you're certainly not alone in the wider field. So, and of course, it's not.
I do what the forms tell me.
Yeah, I understand. We can fix that up going forward without too much difficulty.
Also, I'm not surprised we had odd phrasing, because we are odd communicators.
Yeah, right.
Other questions? Okay. Well, if other questions come up, feel free to email us. You have our contact information in the email that contains the feedback forms. We want to be as available as you need us to be, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us. The new templates will be available imminently. And other than that, you will hear from us again sometime following February 20th, after we've had a chance to process the data and produce the next round of feedback forms.
This is Stephanie once again. Sorry. Once the new templates are out there, since those of us that need to resubmit need to use the new template and include the new fields, what kind of turnaround time are you looking for in terms of getting it back to you?
Well, I mean, we'd like to shoot for February 20th again. If that presents a real problem, let us know. We know this is a new form, and if this is a new field, so if this causes a major headache in terms of how complicated it is to fill in, as long as we are feeling like you're moving forward and you are paying attention to the data submission, then if you can communicate that to us, then that's fine.
Okay, that shouldn't be a problem, but has the error in the upload site been corrected?
The error in the upload site, what are you talking about?
At one point it was allowing us to upload one file but not both files, and I think I ended up having to submit my ongoing participant data in the one-time data slot on ARC's website. I addressed this with you guys back when the data submission occurred in October.
Yeah, we've got furrowed brows, so we're going to have to follow up on that, Stephanie. I'm not sure.
I remember that, Stephanie, but yeah, we're in contact with ARC periodically, and we just talked with them last week, and that one we didn't push that one, so we'll have to contact them again and make sure it's corrected. But we'll make sure that we'll make sure that he looks into it and as happy as he can be that everything is working properly before the February 20th submission. Thank you for reminding me again.
Okay, this is Beth again. Also on that new column, the new column is just going to be the overall program. So because a CP shares the same courses as the TCs and the AASs, if it's, for example, in mechatronics, that column is just going to be mechatronics. So for South Arc, it'll either be process technology, welding, or mechatronics. So you don't have to pick the exact program. It's just the overarching name.
Right, that's a good point. And for stacked credentials, it's at the stack level, not broken down deeper than that. Thank you. And when I give the comment for that field in the new template, I will reiterate that point.
Well, thank you, everybody. This webinar will be available online shortly, within the next couple of days. And again, if you have any questions, please reach out. Okay, thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.
No, thank you.
Bye-bye. So, okay, let me get into the comparison data.